It is Locked On Jazz for the 23rd of May. Athletes and drivers. That's what we're seeing in the NBA playoffs. What does it tell us for the Utah Jazz? Mike Conley season in review, Atlanta Hawks deep dive. It's all coming up on today's edition of Locked On Jazz. Bum 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 bum.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available for you on all platforms, including YouTube, where a like, thumbs up, comments help out, and any review at the most amount of stars they allow would be great. Give me 1 second. The door's not entirely closed here. It's early in the morning. The wife and daughter are sleeping, and I don't want to go to the doghouse. So give me 1 quick second. All right. That increases my chances of broadcasting from the same spot tomorrow rather than from outside, or the van for that matter. Here's what we're going to do for the next little while. We have about 5 weeks until free agency. We have 4 weeks until the draft. The Jazz don't have a draft pick, but I think they'll end up with one. I don't know how, but I just feel like they will. So what we're going to do is over the next 5 weeks, we're going to take, that's about 25, 30 shows, and I've got some travel in there. We're going to take a look at stories of the day in the league, whatever's relevant. Player review, that'll take the next 12 shows or so, so that's about 3 weeks worth. Team analysis, we'll look at teams and see whether they have players we might want. So today, we're going to talk about what's going on in the league, which to me, as I'm watching the playoffs, is drivers and athletes. And then the second one we're going to talk about is Mike Conley's season. And the third thing that we're going to look at is the Atlanta Hawks and whether or not they have players that we might be interested in acquiring. So that's the plan here for Locked On Jazz for the next little while. So thanks for making it your first listen every day and a part of your regular habit. If you watch the NBA right now, the game's getting pretty simple, right? There's a lot of talk about no bigs, a lot of talk about switchability. To me, what really is going on here is you have elite athletes on the floor and you have every single player is able to drive. And hear me out on this a little bit. So what I'm seeing is, Andrew Wiggins is a great example. He was brilliant last night. He's the number one pick of the draft, but he's a pretty high level athlete. Number one pick of the draft. That's what he brought. You look down the Warriors roster. Wiggins, elite athlete. Draymond's probably an elite athlete, though undersized. Looney might not be with all of his hips and knees problems, but good size. Clay, he's pretty special with his movement. Curry, certain elite athlete. Poole, elite athlete. And then look who's like getting those side minutes. It's Moody, who's in a top 10 pick. Kuminga would probably be the next one. But some of the players who we've seen during the regular season, a Duncan Robinson, a Nima Bjelica, some of these other guys who, frankly, are catch and shoot or outside perimeter or aren't elite athletically or can't drive, suddenly don't play. Bullock, elite athlete. Dorian Finney-Smith, elite athlete. Brunson's probably elite athletically, though small. Doncic is otherworldly. Maxi Kleber's an elite athlete. Spencer Dinwiddie seems to be moderately to high on the athletic scale to me. And also all other than Finney-Smith, who just snuck through because he was a center at Florida, first round picks. Bertans plays, but only little. And then you've got guys who just, who don't get the time they used to get. On Boston's side, you have Tatum, elite athlete. Brown, an elite athlete. Marcus Smart, an elite athlete. Grant Williams, undersized, but I'd say pretty fabulous athletically. And then you're trying to work. Derek White's not an elite athlete at all. He works in for like 14 minutes a night, and he's a little short on time. Peyton Pritchard, I actually think is an elite athlete. Probably just inexperienced. Robert Williams is probably an elite athlete when he's available. Over on Boston, Miami side's a little different. They're actually not playing elite athletes in it. Remarkably, they tied that series the other day. But they are. PJ Tucker's not an elite athlete. Max Strauss is not an elite athlete. I don't think Kyle Lowry is anymore. And Victor Oladipo was at one point. I don't know where he is on the scale anymore. So it's an interesting one to me that Miami just seems to be doing it in a different fashion. But when you look through the league and you watch the games right now, the two things you're seeing out of guys is guys that can drive and so therefore when they drive, it's creating this drive and kick game. And then you're watching guys that are all elite athletically. So they either make plays or they are able to, get by their guy, or they're able to rotate defensively and play. When you look at the beginning of the best driving team in the NBA this year was the Dallas Mavericks. The fourth best driving team in the NBA was the Boston Celtics. The fifth best driving team in the league was the Milwaukee Bucks. The sixth best was the Utah Jazz. The seventh best was Philadelphia. Miami was ninth. Boston actually is not a very good driving team, which is interesting. And I'm trying to find out where they are. Oh, no, Boston's fourth. So who am I missing? Golden State. Golden State's the 13th best driving team, and they play very differently. So all of the final four teams are top 15 in drives, in efficiency. Golden State just doesn't do it quite as much. When you look at drives per 100 possessions, the Thunder and the Hornets are number 1 and 2 in the league. They're just not good at it. The Jazz were third, and we were good at it. We were one of the better drive teams in the league, and we did it a lot during the regular season. In the playoffs, some of our guys weren't as capable of doing it. But it's to me what I'm watching in the playoffs right now. That's what I'm seeing is the teams that have the best drive games. That's how you're breaking down an offense. You're not doing it or defense. You're not doing it with plays. You're not doing it with this. You're doing it right now. Miami during the playoffs has switched and become again, not heavy, but they're the number 2 drive team in the playoffs. They're at 1.09 points per drive. Dallas is 1.09 points per drive and very, very good at it. And the teams, Devin Booker's not a great drive player. That might have been some of the problems for him in that playoff series. That's not really his game. And that might have been some of the problems for Phoenix. It also might have been when Utah's drive game fell apart a little bit, you suddenly don't have quite as many kick out passes and threes. For the Jazz during the season, if you look at our drive game, as I said, we were really, really good at it. And if you rank the players in the NBA, the top 120 drive guys who drove the 120, the kind of most, Jordan Poole's the 6th best in efficiency in the NBA. Spencer Dinwiddie is elite at this as well. This is the big change to both the Warriors and the Mavericks, that they added these guys that are great at it. Luka had the most drives of anyone in the NBA this year. Jalen Brunson was one of the top guys in the NBA in drives as well. So that opens up all sorts of possibilities. Brunson is 16th best driver, and he took about the number 1 drive guy in the league was Luka. Brunson took the 9th most. He's the 16th best. And then you added Spencer Dinwiddie, who's good at it. And suddenly they have 3 really dominant drive guys that changed who they are as a team. And that to me seems, to be what I'm watching and what I'm seeing in the league. Now, from a Jazz standpoint, during the year, Donovan's the 12th most common drive guy in the NBA. And he ranks 17th in the league at 1.08 points per. And in the playoffs, he was good. He was at 1.09. He was right where he was in the regular season. If you think about our playoffs, the 2 guys that were good at this were Donovan and Jordan Clarkson. And maybe part of the reason Donovan shot so badly in the playoffs is because nobody else could drive. Jordan's is not a big passer out. Jordan was elite. He was outstanding in the playoffs at 1.13 points per drive, but he's not passing up Donovan. So the fact that we really didn't have anybody else on our roster who can drive, get in the lane, and is going to kick it out to Don to get Donovan's 3-point shooting going might have been part of the problem. Now, Donovan's catch and shoot game was off all year. It's still been elite over the last 5 years. One of the best in the league. Only Joe Harris has been better going into this season. And so you'd think he'd need those opportunities. Mike Conley was the one who really slipped. Mike Conley, who took the 20th most drives in the NBA during the season. He wasn't really actually great at it it's not as though he slipped. So during the regular season, Mike took the 20 most drives, and of the 120 players who took at least, in the top 120, Mike ranked 70th in the NBA. He was in the 42nd percentile of points per drive. So he's down with, some campaigns and Gabe Vincent's and Corey Josephs and LaMelo Ball and Eric Bledsoe's and Reggie Jackson's and Davion Mitchell's. He's not in the elite crew during the regular season this year at all. And then in the playoffs, he really fell off the map. He took 70 drives in that series and averaged 0.85 points per drive. He was at 0.99 during the regular season. And that hurts. Like, if he's not creating and making things out of the drive, we get very, very limited. Royce doesn't drive. The guy we actually missed is Trent Forrest. He had the 5th most amount of drives on our roster this year. Bojan Bogdanovic drives some. He drove 428 times in the season. To put that in kind of some perspective for you, that puts him in about the 100th place or 84th most drives of any player in the league. So divide that by 30. He's the 3rd guy on each roster, and he was the 4th on ours because we drove a lot, and he was decent at it. Like, he was at 1.03, which is pretty good. And during the playoffs, he was down. He was right about the same thing because Bojan's just always the same thing. He really, we just didn't. That's not like, if you look at our roster, these two characteristics, when we talk about rebuilding the roster a little bit, I think play in. We didn't have elite drivers other than Donovan and Jordan as Mike's got a little older, and we don't have elite athletes. Royce is not an elite athlete. Bojan's a special athlete, but I don't think it's hard to say you're not an elite athlete when you're an NBA player. If you're not an elite athlete as an NBA player, but I think you guys, we don't have Andrew Wiggins, right? We don't have that Dorian Finney-Smith type athlete that's going on there. Donovan's pretty special athletically. Rudy's pretty special athletically. After that on our roster, Daniel House is pretty special athletically, and it jumped out probably more than it should have. So I think that's an interesting one to chew on as we look toward the rebuild of this Jazz roster and what we're seeing in the playoffs and what lessons we can learn from that. Today's show is we'll look at Mike Conley's season next, really a split of 2 seasons, a fabulous regular season and then a playoffs that was a real struggle, as we can start our player reviews. Today's show is brought to you by Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross, also in also in Logan. The Murdoch have been with Utah for over 80 years. Nothing higher than MSRP right now, despite the car shortage, despite the fact they can do it. Blake just doesn't believe in it, doesn't want to be taking advantage of people, doesn't want to be going to the grocery store or church or somewhere and seeing people that, he got an extra $5,000 for on a car because he could. People in the industry think he's nuts for this. He thinks we've been here for 80 years. We want to be here for another 80 years. This is how you build relationships. The Chevy lineup is absolutely fabulous. The trucks. The Colorado would be a great summer truck to be cruising around. Little small, throw things in, go on the camp trip, whatever. The Silverado, I like to call it the lazy boy of the trucks because it's this big, beautiful, rising up above, feeling good. I might have to talk Blake into driving another Silverado for a while. I love doing that. That was great. The Silverado truck with all that power. The SUV lineup is fabulous as well. The Blazer and the Trailblazer have changed the SUV lineup. The Equinox is their mid-sized SUV that's great. The Traverse is the bigger one, and then the Trax, the smaller one. Plus, the Legends, the Tahoe, and the Suburban in the Chevy lineup. If you're heading over to Murdoch Chevy, feel free to give me a call you don't need to give me a call. You can give me an email at dlock09@gmail.com. Today's show is also brought to you by Sakara. One of our guys tried Sakara for the first time. If you don't know about Sakara, Sakara is seeks wellness, joy, and abundance in all areas of life, starting with what you eat. Sakara gets you nutrient-dense meals, snacks, and supplements that nourish your body without sacrificing taste or quality. So, in other words, wants you to live a healthy, balanced lifestyle, truly enjoy it, delicious, plant-rich, transformational nutrition that builds a foundation for living the best body. Our Locked On Knicks host picked this up the other day, and they said their Tuesday meal was a Sakara Earth Bowl with a tahini ginger dressing. He said tasty salad dressing, kind of similar to the dressing you get at a sushi salad in a sushi restaurant. Really liked it. Wednesday was a Georgia peach parfait, a parfait with a cinnamony vegan yogurt base and a sort of granola on top. Slices of peach swimming in the bottom. It was really tasty. His Wednesday lunch was sweet beet and toasted cashew medley with a carrot ginger glow dressing. He said the nice salad had quinoa, beets, cashews, mushrooms, along with a spring mix. Dressing was similar to the one the night before. Then he had a French lentil soup and his chocolate love muffin with superfood caramel for dessert. His Thursday lunch was a classic chopped salad with magic mushroom dressing. He said another salad, but this one's different. Black beans, shredded rainbow, carrots, tomatoes. The dressing was kind of the consistency of like a smooth hummus and kind of tasty like hummus too. Again, he said not the most filling, but certainly tasty salad for you. And he still had Thursday dinner to go. That's all from Sakara, is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. Sakara gives you the tools you need to transform your life through organic, ready-to-eat meal delivery program and functions wellness essentially. So go right now to Sakara is offering you 20% off your first order when you go to sakara.com/lockedon20. Enter the code LOCKEDON20 at checkout. That's Sakara.com, SAKARA.com/lockedon20 to get 20% off your first order. Sakara.com/lockedon20. So let's look at Mike Conley before we dig into the Atlanta Hawks in a minute or two here. And we'll start with points gained on all these players and just kind of see how they've progressed over the 3 years. So Mike Conley came to Utah after all of his run in Memphis. He's been with us for 3 seasons. His last season in Memphis, he was a 0.4 points gained player, played 70 games. Points gained is our offensive metric. 0 would be average. Lower numbers for guards, higher numbers for centers. He then, in his first year with us, really struggled, was a negative 0.7, which is not great. Last year, 2 years ago, he was fabulous, and he jumped it up to a 0.5. And this year, he fell right in the middle at 0.1. So he used his possessions, his 12 scoring opportunities a game that he used them at right about the league average. That's how points gained works. It takes the scoring opportunities you have on a given night. So in the case of Donovan, he had 23 a night. Mike had 12. And you allocate those to average play, the average offensive player in the league, and see what they would have done. Let's put Mike into perspective here of other guards that are kind of in the 0.3, point guards in the 0.3 to 0.1 range that play kind of a similar position to Mike. And Donovan Mitchell is actually a 0.3. Matisse Thybulle is a 0.3. You wouldn't think of them as similar. Ryan Arcidiacono for 10 games for the Knicks was. So just mention him because he popped up. Lonzo Ball in Chicago was a 0.2 as a point guard. Other players, Bryn Forbes as a shooting guard. Mike Conley. Peyton Pritchard was a 0.1 in Boston. Sliding below Mike a little bit in the point guard area. I would find, it's hard to find true point guards anymore. You don't find actually a lot of guys right at average in the point guard position. You slide down Brandon Knight with his little time. It's so funny to see some of the names this year of guys that got a little bit of times. Patty Mills was a negative 0.1 this year, kind of similar age bracket as Mike. The best point guards in the league, maybe that's a better way to give you perspective since there were so few that were around Mike. The best point guards in the league in points gained this year were Trae Young at 1.7, Steph at 1.5, Josh Hart at 1.1, and then Ayo Dosunmu sliding down a little bit. Ayo Dosunmu at 0.4, Kyle Lowry at 0.8, Chris Paul at 0.4, Luka at 0.2, Mike at 0.1. So Mike's pretty good in that realm of point guards. If you think of, some of the Malcolm Brogdon was a negative 0.3, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was a negative 0.4, LaMelo was a negative 0.4. Mike Kemba was negative 0.6 as he fades out of the league. Dame was a negative 0.7 last year. De'Aaron Fox a negative 0.7. D'Angelo Russell a negative 0.7. Hard for point guards to stay above average. And so Mike, actually, if you look at his regular season rankings and a bunch of metrics and all sorts of things, he ranks as about a top 35 player in the regular season. He just ends up having a tough playoffs. If you look at Mike's season, he does show at 34 years old, as he should, as a point guard at a small point guard at 6'1", 175, probably soaking wet at this point, is some signs of decline. He takes just 11 shots. It's one of his lowest years ever. His three-point shooting was still great. He's at 41% on threes, his second best three-point shooting season of his career. His 2 points are still good. He's slid a little bit in his free throw shooting, which is a bit strange. But if you look at his per 36 minutes, his 17.2 points is the fewest since 2012-13 when he was 25. His shots per game at 13.8 is the fewest he's had since that same 12-13 season. So he's now shooting over 50% of his shots as twos the last two as threes, which is fine, which is good. He's become predominantly a three-point shooter, and that's the one area. If you look at his steal rate, it's actually right about the same. That's usually a sign of decline, but that doesn't exist. His offensive win shares was at 4.4, about the same as last year. His defensive win shares was at 2.3, about the same as last year. Played more games. His win share per 48 was down a little bit, but there's just a lot of signs that he's still, he was still wildly effective, but you can see the aging. Here's one I thought was interesting. Shooting fouls drawn. His last year in Memphis, 158 in 70 games. And this year, 53 in 72 games. So a third of what it was 3 years ago. He's playing a little differently. He plays, not with the ball in his hands as much. There's some areas. With the Jazz, he had 58 in 51 games 2 years ago, just 53 in 72 games. So just not quite drawing the fouls as much. And then you see it here when you look at his shooting, where he shoots. So he has a funky 12-game season I try to take out. But in his prime, when he's 28, he was taking 26, 27% of his shots at the rim. His final 2 years in Memphis, he's shooting 19% of his shots at the rim. His first year in Utah, he takes 13% of his shots at the rim, then 11%, and now 8% of his shots at the rim. His make level is down a tiny bit. You would actually think his make level might go up when you're suddenly only shooting 8% of his shots at the rim. His floater, which everyone likes so much, goes in 45% of the time, which is kind of suboptimal. He used to shoot it about 14% of the time. Then it went to 16. Then it went to 20. It's now up to 27% of his shots are between 3 and 10 feet is that floater. So he's really no longer getting to the rim other than 8% of the time. He's shooting 52% of his shots as threes both the last 2 years. So when you think of him, still very good, productive point guard, above average offensively and efficiency, as we just showed you, able to just becoming less and less going to the rim. And he's 34 years old at this point, and that's a natural progression. The playoffs were obviously tough on him. 33% shooting, 13 turnovers, 20% from three. He averaged 9 points a game. And he couldn't guard Jalen Brunson. That's just a really disappointing, finish to what was actually a really fabulous 34-year-old season for Mike. And I think, we have to. This is what's tricky about Mike is that his season, he was really good this year. His pick and roll efficiency is interesting too. So he was at 9.985 this year. And if you go back and look at what he was in the year prior, which was, his all-star year, and everyone was like his best year, he was considerably better. He was at 1.09 on his pick and roll. And what's interesting is he was super good on small pick and rolls. He was good with Jordan. He was good with Royce. He was good with Bojan. He had some he plays almost exclusively with Rudy, and he was 1.10 with Rudy. This last year, his pick and roll offense, probably related to not going to the rim quite as much, and everything else slid down to 0.985. And he and Rudy went from 1.10 to 1.01. And then his small game was still pretty good with Royce and Bojan. It never clicked with Rudy Gay, and it was way off with Jordan and Donovan this year. So something in that, and that might be that he's getting switches, not quite as old or not quite as quick as he once was, not able to maybe make that same play as he did before. So that's a quick overview on Mike Conley's season. We can dig much deeper into some of these guys, but I don't know. I don't want to bore you with 30 minutes on Mike Conley. I think that's the overview, right? Still fabulous regular season, difficult postseason, pick and roll efficiency dropping a little bit, going to the rim a little bit less, really becoming a predominantly shooter. And then in the playoffs, when he goes 0 for 11 on catch and shoot threes, you end up seeing a guy that is really struggling. His off the bounce three was the second best in the NBA behind Desmond Bane for the season. And then in the playoffs, he loses the catch and shoot, and then those numbers are really bad. So he's really a three-point dependent offensive player almost at this point. Today's show is brought to you in part by betonline.net. You're looking to get in on the fun and learn more about what's going on. Your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information is betonline.net. Find all the latest odds, news, sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball, fights, and even more. Even next NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering info, from live betting to playoffs to esports to more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. Bet Online, where the game begins. Warriors obviously about to walk their way to the NBA Finals. There's not much of a bet on that series at this point. I would guess they've taken that off the board. The Heat, though, are minus 110, and the Celtics are minus 110. So they have that one at completely the even right now, which is kind of fun. NBA draft, the number one pick, Jabari Smith is minus 140. Chet Holmgren is plus 190. And Paulo Banchero is plus 475. That's pretty interesting. That's all at betonline.net. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen. For your second listen, want to learn more about those NBA draft prospects, feel free to listen to Locked On NBA Big Board, led by Rafael Barlow. It's your daily NBA draft podcast. All right, let's look at Atlanta Hawks quickly. We don't have quite as much time as I had looked at on this. So if we look at the Atlanta Hawks, and we'll actually share the screen on the YouTube version of this because it makes it more interesting for you. And we will have we have the John on the Hawks. First question anytime we look at any of these teams is, do they have an interest in one of our stars? Like, is there a star package to be made? It's not my ideal thing for the Jazz to do. I think you hold on to both guys and see if you can build around them. But they would have some interest in Rudy Gobert. There's no question. I don't know if they would have interest in Donovan Mitchell. They already have Trae Young. Seems like D'Angelo Hunter's emerging. You have interest in Donovan, it's great, but Trae Young, Donovan Mitchell backcourt would be a little funky. And I'm not sure it would coexist particularly well. So Rudy at $35 million is certainly someone I think they would have interest in. And what's interesting to me is a lot of Jazz fans keep sending me Clint Capela trades. And you put this thing together with Clint Capela and I don't know what. I'm just looking at the numbers. John Collins comes out to $41 million. Rudy's at 35. You throw Rudy Gay into the mix and you probably have a deal. What's interesting to me is that everybody wants to do this, like some player and Clint Capela for Rudy Gobert. Not everyone, but some people, as though that's like almost similar. Like, I don't understand that deal at all. And let me explain why. Clint Capela is Rudy Gobert, just not nearly as good. Capela, out of the 90 pick and roll bigs in the NBA, ranked 61st defensively this year out of 90 pick and rolls defensively. Rudy ranked fourth, only actually after being outdone this year by Robert Williams and two other guys who weren't in the pick and roll nearly as much. If we took the filter to 1,000 and got the top 60 pick and roll guys instead of the top 90, Rudy's the second best in the NBA and has been the number one. They're not similar, other than the fact that they're both long and unskilled. And so if you suddenly are adding Clint Capela, who if you take the 45 bigs who guarded 1,000 pick and rolls, ranks 33rd out of 45, all you've done in my book is that you've suddenly taken exactly the same problem of what you had before, which is that you had a big who has a hard time getting out on the floor at times, who can't offensively do some things, who defensively gets spread out of the middle and doesn't have an impact, and you've just made him less good, right? Like, if you're trading Rudy Gobert, it better be that you're completely transforming your team into something different, because if you're going to have a big, you might as well have the greatest big in the world. Seems really strange to me, the idea that you would want to trade Rudy Gobert for Clint Capela, bring the exact same type player in who's just like 60% of what Rudy Gobert is. Maybe. And maybe it's financial flexibility. You're only paying 18 for that position instead of 35. You can argue that. But it's, Atlanta's not an elite defensive team. I like Capela an awful lot, but like, he's not Rudy. Other players that are interesting here, John Collins at $23 million with 5 years on his deal. Atlanta's always felt lukewarm on John Collins. Collins is incredibly efficient. He does spread the floor a little bit. For whatever reason, Atlanta's been lukewarm on him. That, I think, is an interesting thing to try to figure out. He has 4 years left on his deal at $23 million. This is the kind of player that, frankly, I think would really, he's good. Like, this is a high-level player. I don't know that he's like an elite athlete. I'd have to dig into him a little bit more numerically and try to figure out. Atlanta's interesting because Okongwu is going to be great, and he's part of the future. DeAndre Hunter's part of the future. Trae Young's part of the future. I think they have to love Bogdanovich. He's been super for them. They're going to have to pay Kevin Huerter at some point here, though. I think they may have already given him his extension, so his numbers just jump up. Not that they have to pay him, that he's going to jump up. I think he got his extension. And Trae Young's numbers are about to jump up, and Hunter's numbers are about to jump up. So there's some incentive for them to move off of a 4-year John Collins contract. Now, if you kind of scan our roster, we said Donovan, no. Mike, no. I don't know that they would be interested in Bojan Bogdanovic, unless that's just simply they're taking someone who has 1 year left on the deal, spreads the floor a little bit more, does that. I'm not sure, if you're doing Royce O'Neal at $8.8 million and you're trying to get $23 million, you have to add $15 million in. So you're now playing around with Bojan Bogdanovic, Royce O'Neal for John Collins. I don't know that that's like making us dramatically better. Bojan Bogdanovic and Rudy Gay, because you're just throwing Rudy Gay's contract in, doesn't seem to actually solve the problem. John Collins is pretty good. He's a very efficient player. He does shoot the three fairly well. And he does run the pick and roll with Trae Young very well. He is kind of a hybrid, and it would be interesting to look at some of his defensive numbers on whether or not he can switch defensively and play that. But this is a guy who averages 16 points, traditional numbers, 8 rebounds, an assist a little bit, shoots 38% from 3. So he spreads it nicely and should be able to play sometime at center. You would think like that would maybe give you the flexibility. He played only 6% of his minutes at center this last year and 14% of his minutes as the center the year before. But Collins is probably the most interesting character on this roster. The Rudy Gobert is probably the most interesting one for them. For us, covers up Trae Young's lack of defense, allows Trae Young to play pick and roll. Trae Young's one of the best paint-to-paint passers that exists. Rudy Gobert and John Collins and, if you're doing something of that nature, then you're Rudy Gobert, John Collins, and you'd need, if we go back to that screen, I just took it off, but if you would need another $12 million of salary from them, DeAndre Hunter gets into it. Now, I'm not sure, Hunter's a top 10 pick. That, that's interesting. If you Jazz do that, they just got more athletic. They just added different players. They're a vastly different team than they were and you've really changed who you are as a team. I don't know if that kind of deal works. You can just play these numbers and start piecing them together, and then you have to figure out what happens there. But that would be probably from Atlanta's standpoint to get if they're trying to go get Rudy Gobert, and you're looking at it from their standpoint to get $35 million together, they're putting John Collins at 23. They would probably like to do John Collins and Clint Capela and we're suddenly on 3 years contracts for Capela and 4 years of contract for John Collins. And we're really, that's 41 coming to us. We would probably throw in Rudy Gay in that to get it to 40. So it's John Collins, Clint Capela for Rudy Gay, and Rudy Gobert is one deal. The Jazz are probably sitting there hunting after DeAndre Hunter, who I think could be a bona fide star in this league. He's a pretty special player. He hasn't stayed very healthy, but at 6'8", 220 in the former 4th pick of a draft, that's a special piece to a puzzle that you would certainly like to be able to, if you could add that, that's going to be of immense interest to you. He's a career 36% 3-point shooter. That hopefully improves a little bit. He's a special talent. You go get a former 4th pick of the draft who's 6'8", 220. You're now dealing with athletes and drivers. And we've wrapped this show up with a full circle. Thanks very much for tuning in to Locked On Jazz today. Now go make Locked On NBA Big Board your second listen. We'll be back with you tomorrow. We'll do a quick scan of the Boston Celtics. They have a lot of pieces, but I don't think it's someone we'll trade. And we'll do our season review on Trent Forrest as we stay at the point guard position for the Utah Jazz. It is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Have a great one.